days are by the earth rotating on its axis around the sun. So in order for there to be 4 days before the sun, you can't have a day without the sun. So there's no way that there can be 4 days. It doesn't make sense. And it said that the plants were made on the 2nd day, but the sun was on the 4th day. Plants need sunlight to survive. So how the plants were surviving, I don't know. So I would ask you, is there anything like that explained in the Quran, or you don't have it? That's not how you guys explain it.
So it's not an explanation whether we have anything similar to in our Islamic texts, Quran or the Sunnah. As far as I know, there is no such thing like this one. What we have is Allah created everything. He says, of this creation, He created every living thing from water. Every living thing He created from water. So that means anything that's living, they are sourced in water. And I would think that science has no conflict in that at all, because whenever we want to look for any signs of life, we say, was there any evidence of water? Yeah, whether it's in Mars or any other planetary bodies. So yes, what Allah says about the creation, He says living thing was created from water, but He's created things that we see and things He hasn't even mentioned that we don't see. So He often takes, Allah says, as an evidential oath that, la uqsimu wa la tubsirun wa la tubsirun. Yeah? What you see and what you don't see. So there are things that is beyond even our, think about it, before the advancement of technology, did we even know that there were this ultraviolet or infrared spectrum of light where other creation can see, that we can't? You see, there are things that they exist in this waveform of light, but we can't see it because we have a narrow spectrum in which we can see, and the humans can see. We have a narrow spectrum of what we can hear, very limited spectrum. But other species like dogs and so on, they can hear beyond that spectrum. Okay? So there are things out there that it is not open to our immediate sensory perception. But if we have the tools, maybe we can listen or we can see to them. That's why people who are totally materialists, they need to really think twice. Like, whatever you see in terms of matter and materialism is not all that is there. There are more than this. That's why when we talk about, we believe in the existence of angels and we believe in the existence of jinn. But these are beyond your physical experimentation to say, okay, we found a jinn there, we found an angel there, because this is a different form of creation, which perhaps tools are not available yet for us to detect them.
The jinn stayed on planet Earth for a long time as well, before Adam was created.
Yeah, before the human beings were created, we had another creation, who were the jinns, who had free will. They had free will. But Allah created human beings with different things. So when we compare, say, the Christian text with the Islamic text, obviously you will find similarities, because Allah is talking about the same events that happened in the past as a historical reality. The flood happened. At one point there was a flood and it happened, but the description and the detail may be different as to what the reality was. The Bible may exaggerate that everywhere there was a flood and everything and everyone died, when we know there was civilization was still standing and thriving. The Quran doesn't give you that picture. It talks about how Nuh alayhi salam, his people, how they were flooded and they were saved. Some of them were saved within this region. Okay, so obvious differences and obvious similarities. If a prophet called Adam alayhi salam existed, Allah would talk about him rather than not talking about him as if he didn't exist. He did exist. So the information has some overlap, but there are clear distinctions where the errors of the Bible, for example, is not present in the Quranic narratives. So when, for example, you see one of the obvious errors in terms of God and His description mentioned in the Old Testament text and the Bible, you will not find anything similar in the Quran. Allah even corrects them. Like the example I gave you initially, 6 days Allah created, and He did not feel any fatigue or need to take any rest, because Allah doesn't rest. Allah is someone who is almighty, this supreme, majestic. He's no need of anything. He doesn't get tired. Sleep and slumber doesn't, get Him and touch Him. But we find in the Old Testament text where God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and on the 7th day He, what did He do? Rested and got refreshed. Can you get refreshed if you're not tired? You refresh yourself when you are tired and you get refreshed.
Yeah.
Islam says no, you have a totally misunderstanding of the concept of God. God doesn't get tired. He is the one who is absolutely all powerful. How can He have a human weakness? Being tired feeling drowsy or sleepy, these are weakness and imperfection. God is free from any of these imperfections. He is the most perfect being. So things like you hear that, we have a God who says, I don't know the hour, but my Father does. The Father may be God then, not the Son. Because the Son says, I don't know the hour. It's an imperfection. Anything that is imperfection cannot be God. Because God is a being that didn't begin to exist. God is a being that weren't brought into existence by anyone. He inherently self-subsists all the time. He's eternally existing without a beginning. That means no one gave existence to God. That means his existence is totally unbound, not limited, not confined. It's an absolute existence. An absolute being with an absolute existence has absolute attributes. Absolute attributes are attributes of perfection. If he has power, no one has more power than God. He is an absolutely all-powerful God. If he has knowledge, no one gave him knowledge, and no one can be more knowledgeable than God, and his knowledge is absolutely perfect in his knowledge. So this is what we're talking about. When the Quran introduces God, Allah, He describes Allah with the most beautiful names, the names which gives the attributes of God in its perfection. So, Inna Allah ala kulli shayin qadir. Over everything, Allah has power. Whatever you bring, Allah has power over all that. Whatever you can imagine that someone is greater, Allah is greater than that. That's why when you hear Muslims saying Allahu Akbar, do we say Allahu Kabir like this? We say Allahu Akbar. Do you know what it means? It's a form of expression where Akbar means greater, like Allah is greater. So whatever you bring, Allah is greater than that. He's greater and greater. That means there can be nothing greater than Allah. So this is the attribute of perfection. Allah is the perfect being. So when He is just, no one can be more just than Him. That's why when the people go to hellfire, because of His justice. But He has been merciful to them in this life. He has given them opportunity to repent, to mend their ways, use their brain and their intellect, get right, get straight, follow the paths of the prophets and the messengers. But people became an open rebel to God and says, no, I'm not going to believe in God. God doesn't exist. And the like. These people, when they reject, there's no escape. And when they will be asked, did there not come to you any prophets or any messengers, any warners? They will say, yeah, they came. But we rejected them, we denied them, we belied them. We said God doesn't reveal anything. But then they will do one thing. They will confess. They will say, but had we but listened to the prophets and messengers or used our intellect, we would not have ended up in this place of torment, in this place. So you can see how Allah constantly in the Quran reminds us and reprimands us. For what? Of not using the intellect. The intellect is a tool that Allah has given us to know the reality, to know that Allah exists, to know that He has given revelation, to know that this messenger is a messenger from God, the guide that Allah has chosen. If we did not use our intellect properly, we would not have an excuse. Because prophets came to tell them with proof and evidence that they are indeed prophets and messengers with a message.
Do you mind if I ask two quick questions? Do you mind if I ask two quick questions? Yeah. So what's in Islam, you're against idol worship, yeah? What constitutes an idol?
An idol is anything that you take as an object of worship. It could be your own desires, your own ego. That could be an idol. You can worship your own self, your ego, and say, okay, I don't need any help, I don't need anything, I am self-sufficient. That becomes your idol. You can take a pop star as your idol. You love them, respect them, have awe and reverence, and so, glorify them. You can't even do anything unless you listen to their music, whatever, right? That becomes an object of worship. You can make image of what you think is God and represent with your own hands. You craft in stone or wood or whatever, and you say this is God. That's an idol. Okay? That's a typical understanding of what people think that idol worship is. But anything other than God, and you focus and you concentrate and have imagery of object of worship, that is an idol.
So when you say, let's say for example, I've made something, and I didn't say it was God, but I said it was from God, and I got everybody to come and worship it. would that be idol worship?
If you worship other than God, and you say,
And what would you consider as worship? Worshipping is to do what? To feel a great affinity with something, to feel a great joy around being around that thing, or what would you consider? As
it's a very, what I say, detailed concept in its breadth and depth of what worship is. Okay, so when we worship God, we are focusing solely and totally and fully our directions of our love, our gratitude, our thanks, and our giving of glory to Him alone. Okay? So this praise and gratitude, everything that is most deserving of, we give it to God, because God is the one who deserves our thanks and glory and our gratitude. But that doesn't mean when I thank someone, it becomes worship. I can thank a human being for helping and being kind and so on and so forth. I thank you for helping me out. That's not worship. Okay? So worship has to be something other than just simple gratitude of things. So you are focusing it's like, if it's praise, if anyone who deserves our praise, if there was a being who deserves our praise for everything, you help me because God created you and made you and gave you all of this to help me. Maybe you gave me some money to help me to buy some food. God gave you that. So ultimately, God is the one who gave you that provision. So if you think about it, who ultimately deserves our gratitude? It's not you. It's God. So that is what we mean by worship.
If I worship the tree, is that idol worship to you? God made that tree.
Yeah. So when you worship that tree, instead of worshipping God and you worship that tree,
but I'm worshipping the tree to worship God because God made the tree. I respect God so much that I worship His creation.
So some people do this and they say, look, you know what? I'm still worshipping God by taking part in the worship of the creation. But God has been very clear. He said, you should avoid worship everything other than Him. Shun and reject and avoid and abstain from the worship of anything other than God. Worship God alone. So that is something that God only approves of, and He doesn't approve of anything other than that.
That can never be done through any physical object, can it? No. Okay, so what's this Kaaba thing then? What's whirring around the Kaaba? How is that not an idol?
Okay. Kaaba,
one second, because you said earlier, if something's made of stone or made of wood or made of anything physical substance, you guys, well, no, not you guys, but Muslims have built, or I don't know if you believe Abraham built it, but it's been constructed by human beings, most likely Muslims, in Arabia from physical things. And you basically surround it and you go around and you do whatever you do. So why is that not idol worship?
Sure. If a Muslim worships the Kaaba, they have committed this shirk and they will be in hellfire forever. Any Muslim who worships the Kaaba, instead of worshipping God, they are committing what we call the shirk or association or worshipping other than Allah. Right? Now, what do Muslims do? So when I go to a mosque, say in Regent's Park Mosque, not too far from here, or East London Mosque, and in the mosque, I go to this place specifically designated not to conduct my businesses, but be there and concentrate and focus and worship God without any disturbance. So it's a house where I go there, specifically made, where I can worship God. Now, if I go to this mosque and I worship God, I'm inside this mosque, am I worshipping the mosque or am I worshipping God? I'm worshipping God. Kaaba is a house like a masjid, a mosque. It's a house of God built for the worship of God. People used to go inside it and worship God and pray. Now you can do that still. It's just a house. It's a house that was built by Prophet Ibrahim a.s. and his son, or rebuilt, and they worship God being there. So you can go inside the house of the Kaaba and you can pray salah like we do and worship God. So it is a house that is built to worship God. That's all. So when we aim ourselves and direct ourselves when we pray, this is where we are all unifying together in one direction of praying. Just because we are directing ourselves to that particular point, it doesn't mean we are worshipping that. we're only focusing to that house which was built to the worship of God. So when we circumambulate, go around in tawaf, we are not worshipping the house. We're worshipping the Lord of Kaaba, the house. He's not in there.
Created Kaaba.
Allah doesn't live in the mosque or in the Kaaba. This is a house built for commemorating the worship of Allah, to worship Allah. There is another house in heaven where angels circumambulate, but Allah is not in that house. Allah is not confined in a house. It is a house where people or creation gather together to remember, to reflect, and to worship God. So, for example, when we go to a particular place, we call multi-faith room, we go to a place of quiet room. What do we do there? It's a specific designated area where we can focus and we can, meditate, or we can worship God. It doesn't mean a multi-faith room is what people worship. It doesn't mean a quiet corner. When you go to a quiet corner, you worship the quiet corner. You are taking a space where you take yourself to that space so that you are removed from all these obstacles of diversions all around you, and you focus yourself clearly without any restrictions, and we worship God. That's the difference between worshipping God and worshipping any of the idols. So Kaaba is not an idol. Kaaba is just a house of God. Like if you say Kaaba is a mosque, then you might say, okay, this is Al-Masjid al-Haram and the Kaaba. Think about that way, that might you help understand that.
I understand what you're saying, but I'll be honest, I hear this from everybody, because the Christians, the Catholic Christians, they will say, Mary's not an idol. But they'll have a woman, a statue of Mary, they'll touch her foot and do all of that, and then they'll read the Bible and they say, oh, no idol worship. But to me, that's just an idol as much as anything is an idol. And I view the Kaaba as a non-Muslim as an idol. But I don't have a problem with idol worship. I don't personally have an issue with it. But at least be genuine about it. If you are going to be building a construction and you're going to be circumnavigating it and touching the walls and crying and very emotionally invested in it, to me that's worship.
Let's
in the same way.
If a Muslim touches the Kaaba and starts worshipping the stone, the Kaaba, the house itself, they're going to go to hell. Yeah, clearly, because they're worshipping.
I've seen it on film that they
what they're doing is they are trying to connect to this house that was built, first house in our Islamic tradition, to worship God. So they want to connect in this worship going around. In fact, everything is going around in circles. Everything in the universe, in our cosmos, everything is in motion in circles. Everything. The electrons circulating around the nucleus. Everything. So when we go there on this house, we're circulating, we are actually worshipping Allah in that particular area. So if I'm not there now, I can still worship God. I don't have to think about the Kaaba.
So could you circumnavigate a church and that would not be to worship, idol worship?
If a Christian, not Muslims are not going to do that, because the worship that was shown in that particular place is a worship of circumambulation. This form of worship is only applicable only there. This going around doing tawaf is not applicable in any other mosques around the world, only in that particular area. That is a specific form of worship in that area only. So if a Christian wants to decide to circumambulate or go around the church and they say we're worshipping God, then from that you cannot infer they're worshipping the church.
So because do you not consider Mary an idol? Or
no, Mary is different. They are asking Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary, Hail Mary. That's different. They're asking Mary for help. So when you ask someone other than Allah for help, you are making them, deifying them. That's different. Yeah? So if someone asks Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or help me do this, or if somebody asks a particular peer or a saint or something and say, a dead person, go to a grave of a dead saint and say, oh, give me some wealth, or give me a son or a daughter, that's saint dead worship. That's not acceptable in Islam. Okay? So we say no, Islam is free from this kind of worship of creation. Whether you worship a dead saint, whether you worship your prophets or messengers or angels or creation, none of them are acceptable and approved. Only worship of Allah alone. And that's why we have no imagery of Allah. We don't make any imagery of Allah. He's unlike anything. That's why we don't make any idols of Allah. Unlike some other people of other traditions where they make with their own hands imagery of God. God has lots of different expressions.
But you could argue, people would argue that you've made imagery of a house of God. That's what they would argue.
House of God
You've made imagery
is not
of that.
God.
I know, but you've made imagery of a house of God. If
No,
I
no.
said that this was a house of Allah, that pole
No,
there.
House of Allah is not where God resides. House
No, I
of God
understand that, but
is a house that is built
to worship
in which
God,
people
yeah.
worship God.
Yeah, I understand
That
that.
is not an image. You can make this house, if you want, into a circle or a sphere, for example, and say call it a masjid. Go around the world and see different kind of masjids today. Masjid comes in different forms and sizes and shapes. Yeah? Some of them are eco-mosque. There's a beautiful mosque in Cambridge, built called eco-mosque. You go inside and see, wonderful, right? It doesn't mean that this is an idol. It's just another house, dedicatedly built where people can be rest assured they will go there and will not be disturbed when they're worshipping God.
We're not going to agree because I consider it one thing, but I understand your perspective. They wanted me to ask, you know, Adam. How do you see Adam as a physical person? Did you think that he had any differential parts to him that were different from us, or he was just like us but in a bigger form?
The details are not present in explicit text. How he was. Allah created him like a human being and breathed into him the soul of Adam alayhi salam, and he became alive. Whether the question of belly button arises, that's the point we're going to go to. Okay, I don't know. I don't think our traditions say anything like that at all. Okay. From his offspring, human beings came, and we are different because we are connected within our mothers in the womb through this umbilical cord, and that's why we have this belly button, because you cut and then you have belly button. Adam alayhi salam didn't come from any woman, any womb, so he doesn't need an umbilical cord for that matter. Okay.
So, and I'll just ask a further question then. You believe Eve is just like any other woman, right?
Eve was created from the ribs of Adam.
So did she have a belly button? She didn't. Well, you don't know.
Again, if you ask, our tradition, as far as I know, in my humble opinion, as far as I know, there is no information about that. But I would say, look, belly button only arises when you need to connect with an umbilical cord with a mother.
Yeah.
None of them had a father or a mother.
Exactly. So with that being said, then finally, as a woman, she would obviously have a vagina, no? So
okay, I think we're going too far into these explicit details.
But I just, because you made that point, but when you look at basic science, the genital parts of a human being, when they're in early formulation, they basically start off as neither.
Yeah, and then the differentiate.
So would you say that?
But we don't say that Eve and Adam, they were created as babies and they developed. They were created fully.
As adults?
As adults. And from them, the children developed within the womb of our mother.
Maybe they have the belly button, it's just
But I'm saying, it's our tradition is silent, and it's not even important to have a belly button. Yeah. Belly button is only needed when you have a connection with your umbilical cord to your mother. Because when an embryo is formed, okay, from the sperm and ovum, when it forms a human embryo, the embryo needs to cling and attach to the womb. And it does to this villi, okay, about 6 days. And then it attaches, and eventually we will find all this, an umbilical cord is formed and it attaches to the placenta where the nutrition is transmitted to the baby. Because that's how the baby develops and survives. If there's no connection to the mother, the baby won't be able to be alive. But that only applies to something that develops from an embryo, basically nothing, few cells, and becomes differentiated into human being. But we're talking about Adam and Eve were fully differentiated into adults, humans, when they were created and fashioned.
I was only really asking those couple of questions. I don't really know.
Okay, nice.
What's your name?
Mansur. What's yours?
Mansur, Mariah.
Read the Quran a bit more if you haven't done so, and you will see the information about the reality is presented in the Quran for us to reflect.
I got a Quran at home, but I study bits and pieces, but I'm not.
Study bits and pieces, ask questions, and then go into the next and so on and so forth. And see. Because ask yourself, what does the Quran say about God? What does the Quran say about me? What does the Quran say about the hereafter? What's the reality? Yeah? Because ultimately, we need to worship our Creator. That's the purpose of our creation. If we don't know what the purpose of our creation is, then we need to really come back and say, we have wasted enough time going around not knowing what the purpose of our life is. Our life has a purpose, and we need to know what that is. The Quran says very clearly, is to worship God. And how we worship God is the Quran then explains to the teaching that the Quran gives to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is how you worship God. So our role is to find out that the Quran is indeed a revelation from God, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is indeed the Prophet of God, and take it from there.
Where are you from, by the way?
From not far from here, but
No, I mean
originally
like, yeah.
I'm from Bangladesh.
Bangladesh. Okay. So